This is Dave Meltzer with Entrepreneurs, the Playbook, and I am excited because I have the former CEO of the Cleveland Clinic, something that I just am heavily involved with, not just here in Las Vegas, but also around the world because of what you've been able to create. Toby Cosgrove, welcome to the Playbook.
It's my pleasure. Nice to have me here.
So there's so many different entrepreneurial things in the world. I wanted to have you on because things or places or institutions like the Cleveland Clinic are one of the most, in my opinion, entrepreneurial ventures that I've ever seen. Talk about money raising and also being able to figure out how to brand and for, luckily, a great purpose. That was your job, to run this entire thing, which has saved millions of lives and are assisting in saving even millions more. How do you evolve into that position to be the CEO of the Cleveland Clinic?
Well, I went to the Cleveland Clinic 44 years ago.
That's
it. As a cardiac surgeon. I spent 15 years just being a staff surgeon there. And then I became the chairman of the Department of Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery. Over the 30 years that I did cardiac surgery, I did about 22,000 heart operations. And then I was about to hang up my spikes because before I got too shaky and someone said, it's time to stop. So the CEO resigned and asked me to throw my hat in the ring. And I thought, well, hey, that's a good gig. I'm not going to have to move. And so for 13 years, I was the CEO and stepped down about 2 years ago.
When you transition from a highly technical trained position as a thoracic and heart surgeon into an administrative operative position as a CEO, you had only truly witnessed it as a doctor. Did you fear that there was an educational gap that you weren't going to be able to satisfy to take over such, a big role? I mean, it's not like let's bring you on as, the executive vice president for a few years and let you jump. You jumped right from being a surgeon into a true CEO.
Yeah, I was totally unqualified for the job.
I love that.
But I decided that what I would do is learn. I had about 6 months before I became CEO, and I would operate all day, and then I would go home and study, read, till my head went down on the desk. And then I had the good fortune of knowing several people, people like Jack Welch, who sort of gave me little tidbits along the way. I went and sucked off knowledge from anybody that I could. Along the way, I was befriended by Michael Porter, who was a professor at the Harvard Business School, who partnered with me over a period of time, and it took me about 1.5 years before I learned about those parentheses on P&Ls aren't good.
Right. But you are an anomaly in the fact that my two roommates in law school were doctors. I come from a long lineage of doctors, and they're known not to be great business. My oldest brother, being a doctor, would always say, Dave, go to college and get well educated, not well trained, like myself. And it seems to me that you really leveraged mentorship a lot when you were transitioning. Was that something that you utilized even to build your surgical career as well?
Absolutely. I used to go all over the world. When I hear somebody was doing something new and interesting, I would go and take my notebook and watch them and take notes. And I learned from people all over the world because there's great ideas all over the place. And I stole shamelessly from other people.
I love that. Now, dealing with fear is something that everyone should be practicing. I always say practice ending fear is one of the key components that I like to train people. You transition your fear in a different way too. I would think, and I've never experienced it, having someone's life in your hand could bring about some anxiety.
Oh yeah.
And when you make a mistake, the results and the outcomes are great, and they affect not just you, but a whole line of legacy, and that's a lot of pressure and a lot of fear.
Yeah.
When you switched to being a CEO and you were resolved in all that fear of actually damaging those lives, did you feel the pressure or the fear of, wait a second, as the CEO, I'm actually, more than one life is in my hand, and did that transition as well, the fear?
Well, I was very anxious about becoming the CEO because I was totally unprepared for it. But I knew that I had a responsibility for, at that point, some 30,000 people. And, you put yourself aside just like when you become a parent. It's no longer about you, it's about the child that you're raising. And so it was no longer about me and promoting my career. It was about promoting the career of everybody else and making it possible for them to succeed. So yeah, I was anxious of whether I could be a good parent for 30,000 people. But I worked really hard at it and thought about it. But ultimately, I realized that the main reason all of us were there was for the patients.
And so that hadn't changed for you.
And that really, I think, was sort of the mantra for the Cleveland Clinic. It's about putting the patients there, and that's why we have a job, that's why we have a hospital, that's why we have clinics. And once you understood why you're there, it gave real purpose. But, you know, unfortunately, cardiac surgeons who are not modest, I don't think have experienced very much, because nothing is more difficult than losing a patient and going to have to talk to the family. And if you haven't done enough surgery, you haven't had that experience. And so you go into every case that you do with anxiety, but you also, it sharpens your concentration and your efforts, and you learn from every case, and you take that learning and you apply it, and you get better and better and better along the way. But I still have nightmares over the cases that I've lost.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I know as an entrepreneur from the other side, someone who hates hospitals, but mom wanted him to be a doctor, I always say to people, it must feel the same when, you know, I've been in some failing businesses where I have to send people home without pay, never to come back. And the worst thing I ever did, I lost over $100 million, forgot to take my mom's house out of my name, which I had bought her, which was my dream of being rich. The only reason I wanted to be rich was to buy my mom a house. And who said when I had to go to her door and tell her, Mom, you know, I've lost everything, but I made a really big mistake and you have to move. That was the only time in my life I ever could equate what, you know, my family members who are heart surgeons and do other things that put people's lives in my hand. I actually felt as if that nightmarish still today. Sometimes that energy comes back on me, like, what could I have done differently to save that one thing? But yet I know it's insignificant as I've evolved compared to the responsibility that you hold. To that end, Cleveland Clinic has grown. So I'd love for you to give me kind of evolutionary historical, you know, analysis of 44 years of that organization, where it started and how much it has grown and where it sits today.
Well, the Cleveland Clinic is now 100 years old. When I joined it 44 years ago, there were 200 doctors in one hospital. Now we are facilities in Northeast Ohio, Toronto, Las Vegas, 5 hospitals in Florida, facilities in Abu Dhabi, soon to have a hospital in London, 66,000 employees and 4,400 physicians working for the Cleveland Clinic. So it's come a long ways.
And your legacy, which do you look upon in differently, all the lives you saved, or just that establishment of the progress that you made in the years that you were CEO and as a surgeon? Because it's extraordinary.
Well, I think, you know, I'm most proud of the people at the Cleveland Clinic. They really, I don't think it's a personal legacy. It's being able to be associated with a great group of people who really work hard and are very dedicated to what they do.
And what are you doing now, transitioning from the CEO? What are you doing now?
Well, I'm a consultant for Google, and one of the reasons I've done that is because healthcare now has so much data. We A, have to store it, and B, we have to use the new machine learning capabilities to analyze that data. And Google has got all that capabilities, and I thought it was a nice transition between bringing the healthcare knowledge and bringing the tech knowledge together, and I think that's where innovation happens.
And you stayed in Ohio, I assume, because you wanted to stay with your family, raise your family, and have that consistency, which seems to be one of the key decision factors of why you stayed there to be CEO. As you mentioned in the interview, I picked up on, also from Akron, so I understand that Buckeye side of it. You seem to be a person that doesn't limit their point of entry, though. You know, it's one thing to live a traditional, you know, America's dream of studying, I'm sure your parents, were on you. Like my mom always said, the fetus wasn't fully developed till after graduate school. You're probably under the same kind of guilt pressure that the rest of the young professionals are under to go to graduate school, become a doctor or a lawyer. I literally tell people, my mom would say, doctor, lawyer, or failure. But there is this entrepreneurial side of you that's like, okay, I spent all of these years to be a tremendous surgeon. That's, you know, a very specific thing, but I'm just going to be CEO of Cleveland Clinic. Then I'm done with that. Now, when you told me Google, I'm sitting here and going, wow, the creativity side of your brain and mind is different than most doctors. You know, I have cousins who still call me because I do business coaching, and I keep on telling them, stop seeing the world like this. You see the world like this. Where do you think that creativity and confidence came from to be able to not limit your point of entry and see things like, well, you know, now that I'm CEO of Cleveland Clinic, I'm just going to work for Google as a consultant.
Well,
do you live in Ohio, by the way?
I do.
Yes.
And so it turns out that I'm dyslexic. And I didn't know that I was dyslexic until I was 34.
Wow.
And it turns out that dyslexics think about things differently. And I used to look at a problem and we'd go around the table and I would come at it from a completely different viewpoint. And I think that dyslexia helped me enormously looking at issues differently than other people were. And so I wasn't that focused. I was kind of out looking around trying to figure out what the hell's going on in the world.
You're almost like the Geico commercial where I have this heart surgeon for 44 years. Like, well, I'm dyslexic, you know, good enough. You're one of the world's leading heart surgeons, and you sat there and didn't know you were dyslexic until your 30s. And how did you find out that you were dyslexic?
I was dating a teacher at the time, and
An elementary school teacher, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we were going someplace in the car, and I was trying to read the New York Times out loud, and she said, "You're dyslexic," and I said, "What's that?" I'd never heard the word before. And over time, I ran into a lady by the name of Sally Shaywitz, who was the individual who showed that dyslexics have a different functional MRI than normal people. And she really confirmed it. And so it is, I look at dyslexia as a gift. It's terrible to try and get through school.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't read or write.
But ended up in med school nonetheless.
Bumbled my way in. But after that, it gives you a different way of thinking, a different way of looking at the world, and it's more creative.
Yeah, one of my favorite sayings is change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And your whole career really is indicated by that. You know, to finish up, I'm really curious about some advice that you would give people, because looking at that career, fear, you have some control. You know, I talked about practicing ending fear. You have a real power, a superpower, I think, of managing fear. You know, from your story, I would love to get some advice from you or for the entrepreneurs out there, because I think fear is such an interference, a corrosion to the power that most of the people watching this, they're always connected to it. We have enough kilowatts in our thumb to light up this entire city here. What advice do you give to people when you see them getting in their own way? And you know, it's really they have all the talent in the world. You know these people. They could be surgeons, they could be executives, but they're getting in their own way. How do you help them end that fear?
Well, you know, I think that you have to get over your fear of failure. And one of the things that a dyslexic does is I failed a lot along the way. So I wasn't really afraid of failing anymore. So I would go into something and say, doesn't work, it's not going to kill me, you know, and I'll live through this. And so I think you learn more from failure if you stop and analyze it and think about it than you do from your successes.
That is awesome. I had the same experience in my dating as a young man. I said, I learned so much. I wasn't afraid to ask, so I got a lot of no's. But that helped me more in my career than anything else, because I always thought in my mind, man, I'm just one more no away from getting what I want. And that simple philosophy has helped me as well. It's been an extraordinary interview. I really appreciate the insight that you've given. Also appreciate all you've done for the entire world by not only saving lives as a surgeon, but taking on that open-ended philosophy of now with Cleveland Clinic as a CEO, and then even furthermore with Google, probably changing how exactly we can facilitate all the information that's necessary to improve upon what you've already built. So thank you so much.
It's been entirely my pleasure.
Appreciate
Thank you.
it. Toby Cosgrove, the former CEO of Cleveland Clinic, consultant for Google now, and former surgeon at Cleveland Clinic with Dave Meltzer's Entrepreneurs, the Playbook.